Hello, my name is Rex Wen. I'm an IronSpeed Designer MVP, and this is part 3 of a video series I'm doing using third-party controls in IronSpeed Designer. If you're just joining us, that's fine. The topics I'm discussing in this part 3 don't necessarily require parts 1 and 2 to understand what we're doing, but it would be beneficial for you to view those videos. In the first 2 videos, we just discussed setting up files and directories to use a third-party control in IronSpeed Designer, and in the second video, we discussed the code configuration and the interaction of the HTML and the ASPX page in IronSpeed Designer. At this point, we've successfully built and run our application. We verified that our third-party control is producing the desired results in IronSpeed. What I want to talk about now is how we can use Visual Studio alongside IronSpeed to give us a development environment that we're comfortable doing. So let's go ahead and get started doing that. Let's jump back into my bare bones example that I've been using throughout this, and let's just go to File, Close Solution, and no, I don't want to save any changes. And what I want to do is I want to go and actually open our IronSpeed generated application, and we are going to use both IronSpeed and Visual Studio to work on the same project at the same time. A lot of people don't understand this interaction that we have and how to leverage the strengths of Visual Studio while doing your IronSpeed Designer work. Hopefully in this video I can just provide a very concise demonstration for how to do this successfully. So let's jump back into IronSpeed. One of the things that I would strongly recommend is that when you do have an application open in Visual Studio or IronSpeed, that you don't have the same file open in either application that you're going to work in. So if we're going to use Visual Studio to work in a code behind page, then we need to make sure that we have that page closed in IronSpeed so that we don't accidentally overwrite anything or miss changes, that type of thing. And you may want to experiment with this at first just to see what I'm talking about. You just need to be careful. So what I'm going to do is in my IronSpeed application, I'm just going to click up here at the top on Presentation Layer. Now I don't have any of my source pages open in IronSpeed. I don't have any changes to save. I'm free to go into Visual Studio now and make the changes that I want to make. So let's go into our Solution Explorer, and you'll see this is exactly our IronSpeed application. Here's our bin directory with the component art web UI DLL. Here's our demonstrations folder that we've been working in and our demo DB. Everything should look pretty familiar. I can't possibly stress enough that we do not want to touch this ASPX page here. Anything we do in Visual Studio in this ASPX page is not going to be respected by IronSpeed. It's flatly going to be overwritten. We will lose everything. When we're using Visual Studio to work alongside with IronSpeed, we should only be working in the code behind pages. So let's go ahead and open up our code behind page, and this should look familiar. It's got our directives in here for using the IronSpeed base classes. It's got our third-party UI namespace. Everything should look exactly the same way it does in IronSpeed. And that's good news for us. Now we have an environment that we're used to working in with IntelliSense and code completion that's going to allow us to come in and make changes that we want to make, add custom functions, things like that, that we can then use in IronSpeed Designer. And I'm just going to demonstrate this really briefly. And as an example, let's just come in here, and let's say we're trying to debug our application. We're trying to figure out where we're having a problem, and I want to know if I'm actually getting into this routine. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type response.write, and what I typically use for debugging is just a statement that says enter build grid. And then down here, I'm going to have a closing response dot write that is exit build grid. And this is just a real simple way, you know, if you want to know where your code execution is getting to before you have an error, this is a nice way to see what's happening. Now, I'm going to save this change. And what we're going to see here is when we go back into IronSpeed now, we can open our Application Explorer. We can click on our code view, and we will be able to see the code we just added using Visual Studio, which is pretty slick. Here it is. IronSpeed picked up the changes for us. Everything looks good. Now at this point, we can compile and run this application using IronSpeed. We don't need to do anything different. We don't need to close Visual Studio. And in fact, why don't we just go ahead and do that? Let's just go ahead and run our application. And what we should see, assuming that everything works the way I expect it to, which isn't always the case, that our demonstration project is going to open in the wrong version of Firefox, which is kind of convenient. I'm going to go ahead and stop this and hold on just a minute while I reset our environment. Alright, I've got Firefox back open again. Let's go back into our IronSpeed application and let's do this again, because as I said, things don't always work out the way I planned. So let's run this one more time. And what we should see is up at the top, we should see our enter and our exit of the grid. And you know, this is feel good for a developer. We just want to make sure that we're getting into that routine working well. It's a really easy way to debug without actually having breakpoints. And as we're waiting for a minute, here we go. Here are my two response.write statements. Here we have enter build grid, which was at the top of that routine, and we have exit build grid. And of course we know our code's getting all the way through because sure enough, here's our grid below. So mission successful. We were able to edit the project in Visual Studio, build and run the application in IronSpeed, and see what we wanted to see. Let's jump into Visual Studio now. Visual Studio has smartly picked up on our changes. IronSpeed has just built its changed files. We absolutely want to accept all of these changes. So let's say yes to all. This keeps the two different IDEs synchronized. They both have the same copies of the code now. Let's obey my golden rule and go into IronSpeed Designer and close our build dialog, and let's just go up here and select something benign that is not a code page. Let's jump back into Visual Studio and let's just say that I want a more verbose expression of what's going on. So I'm going to say now entering build grid, and I want to have a little bit better formatting. So I'll do, this is how we insert a new line, and I'm going to type now exiting. And we're going to save this, and let's go ahead and run this. Now we haven't had to do anything special to run this application inside of Visual Studio. It's just going to compile and build for us. So let's see what we get. Well, we didn't get our formatting because I forget response.write doesn't actually recognize the \r/n, but the idea is consistent. Our code changes were picked up. We've got our now entering, now exiting, and successfully we've been able to build and to work within, make changes, build and run our application using both Visual Studio .NET 2005 and IronSpeed Designer version 4.0.3. So here is our demonstration page. It's got the code changes we've made. Let's just go make sure, for the sake of consistency, that our IronSpeed Designer is going to pick up those code changes. And sure enough, it has. And that's all there is to leveraging the strengths of Visual Studio.NET 2005 IDE and IronSpeed Designer to build applications side by side and work in an environment we are familiar and comfortable in. And that concludes what I wanted to talk about in this part of the video series. Feel free to join me in part 4, where I show you how to take this whole application that we've just done and turn it into a reusable control in the IronSpeed toolbox. So that's it for now. See you in part 4.